The trading post of Xerion Prime sat like a metal tumor on the crystalline surface of the dead moon, its lights flickering against the eternal darkness of space. Inside the main hub, creatures from a dozen different worlds conducted business in the universal language of commerce. The air recyclers worked overtime to accommodate the various atmospheric preferences, creating pockets of sulfur-tinged zones for the Korthak merchants and oxygen-rich areas for the mammalian species. Elena Martinez moved through the crowded marketplace with the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of her 26 years among the stars. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her clothes were the standard-issue coveralls of a freight hauler. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was anything other than another human trying to make a living in the Outer Rim territories. But the dragons knew better. The first sign of trouble came when she approached the Draconian trade delegation's booth. The massive reptilian beings, each standing nearly 12 feet tall, with scales that shimmered like polished obsidian, suddenly went rigid. Their conversation stopped mid-sentence, and every eye turned toward her. Elena frowned, checking the datapad in her hand. She was here on legitimate business. Her cargo ship, the Wandering Star, needed new atmospheric processors, and the Draconians manufactured the best ones in known space. She had credits, proper documentation, and a clean trading record. There should have been no problem. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the lead Draconian, whose name tag identified him as Trade Minister Vorthak. "I'm interested in purchasing 3 Mark 7 atmospheric processors for a Frontier-class vessel." Vorthak's golden eyes widened in what Elena could only describe as terror. The massive dragon took a step backward, his clawed hands trembling as he reached for something at his belt. Not a weapon, but what looked like a communication device. "No," Vorthak said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the deck plating. "No. We cannot. We will not." "Is there a problem with my credits?" Elena asked, confused. She pulled up her financial records on the datapad. "I can transfer payment immediately." The other Draconians in the booth had begun backing away as well, forming a loose circle around their trade minister, their massive heads turned toward each other. And Elena caught fragments of conversation in their native tongue. Urgent, frightened whispers that made no sense. "The scent," one of them hissed. "It cannot be." "Impossible," another replied. "She is too young." "But the bloodline." Elena's frown deepened. She had encountered cultural misunderstandings before, but this was something else entirely. The Draconians weren't just refusing to trade with her. They were genuinely afraid of her. "Look," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and reasonable. "If there's some kind of cultural protocol I'm not following, I apologize. I just need the processors. My ship's life support is failing, and I have passengers depending on me." At the mention of passengers, Vorthak's terror seemed to intensify. He activated his communication device and began speaking rapidly in Draconian. Elena didn't understand the words, but she recognized the tone. He was calling for help. Within minutes, the situation had escalated beyond anything Elena had ever experienced. More Draconians arrived. Not traders, but what were clearly military personnel. They wore the distinctive black and silver armor of the Draconian Space Command, and each carried weapons that could level a small building. But they weren't pointing those weapons at Elena. Instead, they formed a protective circle around her, facing outward, as if expecting an attack from somewhere else in the trading post. "This is insane," Elena muttered, looking around at the crowd of onlookers who had gathered to watch the spectacle. Representatives from a dozen species watched with obvious confusion and curiosity. A few of them were recording the encounter on their personal devices. Commander Zephox, the leader of the Draconian military unit, approached her with visible reluctance. His scales were a deep blue-black, and his armor bore the insignia of someone with significant authority. When he spoke, his voice carried the formal cadence of military protocol, but Elena could hear the underlying tension. "Human Elena Martinez," he said, "you will accompany us to the secured section of this facility. For your safety and ours." "My safety?" Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not the one with an armed escort. What exactly is going on here? 1. End. 1. Zephox exchanged a look with his subordinates. You do not know? Know what? What you are. What your bloodline represents. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. My bloodline? I'm nobody special. I'm just a freight hauler from Earth Colony 7. My parents were terraforming engineers. And your grandmother? The question caught Elena off guard. Her grandmother had died when Elena was 12, and she had only vague memories of the woman. Rosa Martinez had been quiet, private, and had never talked much about her past. Elena's parents had always said that Rosa had been some kind of government worker before retiring to the colony. She's dead, Elena said. Has been for 14 years. What does any of this have to do with atmospheric processors? Zephox's expression was unreadable, but his posture suggested he was struggling with some kind of internal conflict. Your grandmother, he said slowly, was Rosa Santos Martinez, formerly Agent Santos of Earth's Military Intelligence Division? Elena blinked. Maybe? She never talked about her work. My parents said she did something for the government, but they never gave me details. Agent Santos, Zephox continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, was the human who ended the Dragon Wars. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. The Dragon Wars were legend. A conflict from nearly 50 years ago that had reshaped the political landscape of known space. The official histories were vague about the details, but everyone knew that humanity and the Draconian Empire had been on the brink of total war before a mysterious peace agreement had been reached. That's impossible, Elena said. The Dragon Wars ended because of diplomatic negotiations. Some kind of treaty. No, Zephox said grimly. They ended because one human woman walked into the heart of the Draconian Empire and reminded us why we should fear your species. Elena stared at him, trying to process what she was hearing. You're talking about my grandmother? Rosa Martinez? She was 5 feet tall and made the best chocolate chip cookies in 3 sectors. She was also, said a new voice from behind them, the most dangerous human who ever lived. Elena turned to see another Draconian approaching, this one even larger than the others. His scales were a deep crimson, and his armor bore markings that Elena didn't recognize, but that clearly commanded respect from the other dragons. They immediately bowed their heads in deference. High Admiral Kyroth, Zephox said, his voice tight with surprise. I did not expect. When word reached the fleet that Rosa Santos's granddaughter was on Zerion Prime, Kyroth interrupted. I came immediately. I had to see for myself. The High Admiral studied Elena with the intensity of a predator examining potential prey. His golden eyes seemed to look right through her, searching for something she didn't understand. You have her scent, he said finally, faint but unmistakable. Will someone please explain to me what's going on? Elena demanded, her patience finally exhausted. What scent? What bloodline? Why does everyone keep talking about my grandmother like she was some kind of legendary warrior? She was a retired government worker who grew tomatoes and knitted sweaters. Kyroth's massive head tilted slightly. You truly do not know? I truly do not know. The High Admiral looked around at the crowd of onlookers, then made a gesture to his subordinates. Clear this area. Now. And establish a communication blackout. Nothing leaves this station until I say otherwise. As the Draconian soldiers moved to comply, Kyroth turned his attention back to Elena. Your grandmother, he said, possessed a genetic mutation that is exceedingly rare among humans. Perhaps 1 in a billion carry it. Those who do. He paused, seeming to struggle with how to continue. Those who do what? Elena pressed. They emit a pheromone that triggers an instinctive fear response in our species. Not just fear, terror. The kind of primal, overwhelming terror that our ancestors felt when facing an extinction-level threat. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. That's ridiculous. Humans and Draconians have been trading partners for decades. There are mixed crews, diplomatic exchanges, cultural programs. Because, Kyroth said, your grandmother made us a promise. In exchange for peace, she agreed that her bloodline would never again take up arms against the Draconian Empire. She swore that her descendants would live quiet lives, away from conflict, away from positions of power. And if we broke that promise, Kairoth's expression was grim. She would return. Elena stared at him. She's dead. Death, the High Admiral said quietly, has never stopped Rosa Santos before. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Around them, the trading post had gone silent, as word spread that something unprecedented was happening in the Draconian section. Elena could feel hundreds of eyes watching her. And she suddenly understood why the dragons were so afraid. She was the granddaughter of a legend she had never known existed, a woman who had somehow been so terrifying to an entire species that they would rather live in fear of her memory than risk awakening whatever power she had wielded. What exactly did she do during the Dragon Wars? Elena asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Kairoth exchanged a look with his subordinates. She destroyed 17 Draconian war fleets without firing a single shot. How? By walking onto their command ships and asking them to surrender. They did. Elena felt her legs weaken, and she had to lean against a nearby support pillar. That's impossible. Your grandmother was impossible, Kairoth said. She was the reason we developed our current understanding of human genetics. After the war, we spent decades studying your species, trying to understand how one individual could wield such power over ours. And we discovered that the pheromone your grandmother produced didn't just trigger fear. It awakened something much deeper, something coded into our genetic memory from the early days of Draconian evolution, a terror so profound that it overrode every other instinct, including self-preservation. Elena shook her head. I don't produce any pheromone. I've worked alongside aliens my entire adult life. No one has ever been afraid of me. The trait typically manifests during times of stress or anger, Kairoth explained, and it requires specific circumstances to fully activate. Your grandmother discovered this during the war when she lost her temper with a Draconian general who had just ordered the bombardment of a civilian colony. What happened to the general? He died of shock. Literally. His nervous system simply shut down from terror. Elena felt sick. And you think I might have this same ability? We think you carry the gene, Kairoth said. But more importantly, we know that even the possibility of its activation is enough to destabilize the current political structure of known space. There are factions within the Draconian Empire who believe that Rosa Santos's bloodline should be eliminated entirely. Others believe it should be weaponized. And what do you believe? The High Admiral was quiet for a long moment. I believe, he said finally, that your grandmother was right to make the promise she did. And I believe that as long as you honor that promise, there need be no conflict between our species. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. Honor what promise? I never made any promise. I don't even know what she promised. To live a quiet life. To avoid positions of power or influence. To never again raise a hand in anger against the Draconian people. To live a quiet life. To live a quiet life to live a. To live a quiet life to live a quiet life. To live a quiet life to live a quiet life. To live a quiet life. I'm a freight hauler, Elena protested. I transport cargo from one place to another. How much quieter could my life possibly be? Kairoth's expression suggested he had an answer to that question. But before he could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the trading post. The lights shifted from normal white to emergency red, and automated voice announced that all docking bays were being sealed. What's happening? Elena demanded. Kairoth had activated his own communication device and was speaking rapidly in Draconian. When he finished, his expression was troubled. A ship has just entered this system, he said. It bears the registration markings of the Earth vessel. Retribution. The ship that belonged to your grandmother. Finally on we consented. Finally on we can 17 other dues. Elena felt the world tilt around her. That's impossible. That ship was destroyed 47 years ago. Apparently not. The communication device crackled to life with an incoming transmission. The voice that emerged was female, elderly, and carried the kind of authority that made seasoned military officers stand at attention. "This is Rosa Santos Martinez aboard the vessel Retribution. I am requesting immediate docking privileges at Bay 7. I believe my granddaughter is in need of assistance." Elena stared at the device in Kairoth's clawed hand, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. The voice was familiar, achingly familiar, but it belonged to a woman who had been dead for 14 years. "Grandmother?" she whispered. The voice from the speaker seemed to hear her despite the distance and electronic interference. "Hello, Elena. I'm sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible." Around them, every draconian in sight had fallen to their knees. The docking bay doors of Xerion Prime had never opened faster. Elena watched through the observation window as a ship she recognized from old family photos maneuvered into the docking bay with movements that seemed impossible for a vessel that size. The Retribution was sleek and angular, built for speed and stealth rather than cargo capacity. Its hull was a deep black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "That ship was destroyed," High Admiral Kairoth said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw the wreckage myself." "You saw what my grandmother wanted you to see," Elena replied, though she had no idea where that knowledge came from. The words simply felt true. As the ship settled onto the docking platform, Elena noticed something that made her stomach clench with nervous anticipation. The Retribution's hull bore scorch marks and what looked like recent battle damage. Whatever had brought her grandmother here, it hadn't been a peaceful journey. The airlock cycled with a soft hiss, and Elena held her breath as the portal opened. The woman who stepped through was unmistakably Rosa Martinez, but she was not the elderly grandmother Elena remembered. This woman moved with the fluid grace of a trained killer, her silver hair pulled back in a military-style bun, her clothes practical black tactical gear that seemed designed for both concealment and combat. But it was her eyes that made Elena's breath catch. They were the same warm brown eyes she remembered from her childhood, but now they held depths of experience and knowledge that seemed almost infinite. This was not a woman who had spent the last 14 years in peaceful retirement. "Hello, sweetheart," Rosa said, her voice carrying the same gentle tone Elena remembered from bedtime stories and scraped knee comfort sessions. "I'm sorry about all the excitement. I had hoped to ease you into this gradually." Elena stared at her grandmother, 1,000 questions fighting for priority. "You're supposed to be dead." "I was, for a while. Death is surprisingly overrated." Rosa's gaze shifted to the assembled Draconians, and Elena watched as every single one of them took an involuntary step backward. "Admiral Kairoth, you look well. The years have been kind to you." "Agent Santos," Kairoth replied, his voice formal and tight with barely controlled fear. "We were told you had passed away. And I did, natural causes, in my sleep, just as the reports said. Very peaceful." Rosa stepped closer to Elena, and her granddaughter caught a scent that was somehow both familiar and alien, like ozone and roses, and something that made the back of her mind itch with recognition. But death isn't permanent when you're protecting family. Elena felt something shift inside her mind, like a door opening that she had never known existed. Suddenly she could sense the emotional states of everyone in the docking bay. Kairoth's terror, the other Draconians' barely controlled panic, the confusion and fear of the various alien traders who had gathered to watch. But underneath all of that, she could feel something else, a presence that seemed to be emanating from her grandmother like heat from a fire. "What's happening to me?" Elena whispered. "Your abilities are awakening," Rosa said gently. "They usually don't manifest until the 3rd generation. But stress can accelerate the process. And I imagine today has been quite stressful." "Agent Santos," Kairoth interrupted, his voice strained. "If I may ask, why have you returned? The treaty has held for nearly 50 years. Your granddaughter has lived exactly the kind of quiet life you promised." Rosa's expression hardened, and Elena felt a wave of something that was definitely not human wash over the docking bay. Several of the smaller alien traders fled immediately, and even the massive Draconians seemed to shrink back. "The treaty has been violated," Rosa said simply. Kairoth's golden eyes widened, That's impossible. We have maintained strict adherence to all terms. Not by you, Rosa interrupted. By the Void Hunters. Elena had never heard the term before, but the reaction from the Draconians told her everything she needed to know. Kairoth actually stumbled backward, his claws scraping against the metal deck plating. The Void Hunters have been extinct for 300 years, he said. No, Rosa replied. They've been waiting. And now they're moving again. She turned to Elena, her expression gentling. Do you remember the nightmares you had as a child? The ones about the dark ships? And the voices that spoke without sound? Elena felt her blood turn to ice. She did remember those nightmares. Recurring dreams that had plagued her childhood until she was about 13. Dreams of vast ships that seemed to be made of crystallized darkness, and creatures that communicated through some kind of telepathic static that left her mind feeling raw and violated. Those weren't nightmares, Rosa continued. They were psychic reconnaissance. The Void Hunters have been studying our bloodline for decades, waiting for the right moment to strike. What do they want? Elena asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. You, Rosa said simply. Or more specifically, what you represent. The Void Hunters feed on fear and despair, but they've never encountered anything like our family's genetic gift. A human who can generate terror in any species, anywhere in the galaxy. To them, you're not just a weapon, you're a renewable resource. Elena felt sick. How do you know all this? Rosa smiled grimly. Because 3 days ago, they made the mistake of attacking my retirement community. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Elena tried to imagine her gentle, cookie-baking grandmother facing down an army of ancient alien predators, and found that the image came surprisingly easily. What happened? Kairoth asked, his voice barely audible. I reminded them why intelligent species fear the dark, Rosa said. But there are more of them coming. Many more. And this time, they won't make the mistake of underestimating us. She reached into her tactical gear and pulled out a device that Elena didn't recognize. Something that looked like a cross between a communicator and a weapon, covered in symbols that seemed to shift and move when she looked at them directly. This is a Void Hunter neural interface, Rosa explained. I took it from their ship before I destroyed it. It contains intelligence about their current fleet movements, their strategic objectives, and their timeline for invasion. How many ships? Kairoth asked. Rosa activated the device, and a holographic display appeared showing what looked like a star map. Elena gasped as she saw the scope of what they were facing. Hundreds of dark ships moving through space in a coordinated pattern that would bring them to the heart of known civilization within weeks. Enough to end every spacefaring civilization in this galaxy, Rosa said. Unless we stop them. We? Elena asked. Grandmother, I'm a freight hauler. I don't know how to fight ancient alien predators. Rosa's expression was patient but firm. You're not just a freight hauler, sweetheart. You're the 4th generation of the Santos bloodline. Your power is potentially greater than mine ever was. What power? All I've done today is accidentally terrify some dragon merchants. Because you haven't learned to control it yet, Rosa said. But I can teach you. The same way my grandmother taught me, and her grandmother taught her. Elena stared at her. This goes back further than you? Much further. Our family has been protecting humanity from threats like the Void Hunters for over 1,000 years. We're not the only ones, but we're the strongest. And right now, we're the galaxy's best hope for survival. Rosa turned back to Kairoth. Admiral, I need you to send a message to the Draconian High Command. Tell them that Agent Santos is recalling the emergency provisions of the original treaty. Kairoth's expression was pained. Agent Santos, you must understand that the political situation has changed significantly since. I don't care about politics, Rosa interrupted, and the temperature in the docking bay seemed to drop by 10 degrees. I care about preventing the extermination of every thinking being in known space. The emergency provisions exist for exactly this scenario. What emergency provisions? Elena asked. Kairoth answered reluctantly. In the event of an extinction-level threat to galactic civilization, The Santos bloodline is authorized to assume temporary command of all Draconian military forces. Elena's jaw dropped. All of them? The Draconian Empire maintains the largest and most advanced military in known space, Rosa explained. But they've never faced anything like the Void Hunters. Their standard tactics and weapons will be useless. And ours won't? Rosa smiled. And for a moment, Elena saw a hint of the grandmother she remembered from childhood. Sweetheart, the Void Hunters feed on fear. What do you think happens when they encounter something that generates pure terror on a genetic level? Before Elena could answer, alarms began blaring again throughout the station. This time, the automated voice announcement was different. All civilian personnel report to emergency shelters immediately. This is not a drill. Unknown vessels have entered the system. Rosa's expression hardened. They followed me. Through the docking bay's main window, Elena could see shapes moving against the starfield. Ships that seemed to be made of crystallized darkness. Just like in her childhood nightmares. As she watched, they began to unfold into configurations that hurt to look at directly. How many? Rosa asked, checking her own instruments. 7 ships, Kairoth replied, his voice tight with fear that had nothing to do with the Santos bloodline. Scout class, but heavily armed. Scout ships, Rosa mused. They're not here to attack the station. They're here to confirm that Elena has manifested her abilities. And if they confirm it, then the main fleet will be here within hours. Elena watched as the alien ships moved closer to the station, their hulls seeming to bend light around them in ways that made her head hurt. Grandmother, I need you to be completely honest with me. What exactly am I capable of? Rosa looked at her granddaughter with an expression that mixed pride and sadness. At full power, you could walk onto the command ship of that fleet and convince every Void Hunter aboard to destroy themselves rather than face you. And at current power, you might be able to make them think twice before attacking the station. Elena stared out at the approaching ships, feeling something building inside her chest. Not fear, but something else. Something that felt like anger mixed with starlight and the sound of distant thunder. Then I guess we better get started, she said. Rosa smiled, and this time there was nothing gentle about it. That's my girl. As the Void Hunter ships continued their approach, Elena felt her grandmother's hand on her shoulder, warm and reassuring despite everything they were facing. Around them, the Draconians were moving with military precision, implementing emergency protocols that hadn't been used in decades. But Elena's attention was focused on something else entirely. The growing awareness that she was not the same person who had walked into this trading post looking for atmospheric processors. Something fundamental had changed inside her, awakened by stress and family legacy and the proximity of her grandmother's impossible presence. The Void Hunters had come looking for a weapon they could use to terrorize the galaxy. What they had found instead was something far more dangerous. A young woman who was just beginning to understand that fear was not something you experienced, but something you wielded. The real battle was about to begin. The command center of Xerion Prime had been transformed into a war room within minutes. Elena watched as Admiral Kairoth coordinated with Draconian commanders across 3 star systems, their massive forms hunched over tactical displays that showed the approaching threat in stark detail. What had started as 7 scout ships had grown to over 40 vessels, all converging on the trading station's position. The main Void Hunter fleet will arrive in 6 hours, Rosa announced, studying the captured neural interface. Once they confirm Elena's abilities are active, they'll call in everything they have. 1. Elena stood before the main tactical display, watching the alien ships move in patterns that seemed to follow no logical formation. Why do they move like that? They're not just ships, Rosa explained. They're extensions of a collective consciousness. Each vessel is like a limb of a single massive organism. How do we fight something like that? Rosa's expression was grim. We don't fight them. We make them destroy themselves. Elena turned to face her grandmother. I still don't understand how any of this works. You keep talking about these abilities, but all I've done is make some dragons nervous. Because you're thinking about it wrong, Rosa said patiently. Fear isn't just an emotion. It's a survival mechanism. Every species in the galaxy has evolved specific fear responses to help them avoid extinction. Our genetic gift doesn't create new fears. It activates existing ones. She gestured toward the draconians in the room. Their ancestors evolved alongside creatures that could kill them with pure predatory presence. The fear they feel when they encounter our bloodline isn't random. It's the same terror their species felt when facing their natural predators millions of years ago. Quote, Elena looked around at the assembled dragons, noting how they all maintained a careful distance from both her and Rosa. And the Void Hunters? That's where it gets interesting, Rosa said. The Void Hunters are artificial beings. They were created by a species that went extinct before most current civilizations even evolved, but their creators gave them one crucial trait. They were programmed to avoid anything that could threaten their long-term survival. You're saying they have an artificial fear response? I'm saying they have the strongest fear response of any species we've encountered, because their creators didn't want them to make the same mistakes that led to their own extinction. Elena processed this information, feeling something click into place in her mind. So, when they encounter us, every survival algorithm they possess starts screaming danger signals, Rosa finished. The first time I faced a Void Hunter ship during the initial wars, the entire crew shut down their life support systems rather than remain in the same space as me. That's what happened to the scout ship 3 days ago? Rosa nodded. But this time, they're prepared. They've developed psychological dampening fields specifically designed to counteract our abilities. It won't stop the fear response, but it might allow them to function despite it. Through the command center's main viewing window, Elena could see the Void Hunter ships moving closer. They had stopped their erratic movements and were now approaching in a more conventional formation. As they drew near, she could make out details of their construction. Hulls that seemed to be made of crystallized shadow, weapons that bent space around them, and sensor arrays that looked disturbingly organic. They're scanning the station, Admiral Kairoth reported. Energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. They're not scanning the station, Rosa corrected. They're scanning Elena. Elena felt a prickling sensation across her skin, like static electricity mixed with the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. The sensation intensified until it became actively uncomfortable, and she found herself unconsciously taking a step backward. Don't resist it, Rosa said quietly. Let them think they understand what they're dealing with. But they do understand, don't they? Rosa smiled grimly. They understand the theory. But theory and practice are very different things. The lead Void Hunter ship moved into position directly in front of the station's main docking bay. Elena could see movement behind what might have been viewing ports, shapes that didn't quite make sense to her human eyes, but somehow conveyed intelligence and malevolent intent. They're requesting communication, Kairoth announced. Put them through, Rosa said. The main display crackled to life, revealing the interior of the Void Hunter ship. The being that appeared on screen was humanoid in basic shape but wrong in every detail. Its skin was a mottled gray-black that seemed to absorb light. Its eyes were pure white with no visible pupils. And when it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made Elena's teeth ache. We are the convergence of the void, it said, the words seeming to come from multiple sources at once. We have come for the genetic anomaly designated Santos 4. And Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Santos 4? Fourth generation, Rosa explained quietly. They've been tracking our family for longer than I realized. Agent Santos, the Void Hunter continued, apparently able to hear their whispered conversation. Your return was anticipated but not expected. The termination event recorded in our databases was confirmed through multiple sources. I got better, Rosa replied casually. Death is not reversible through any known biological process. Death is just another obstacle. And obstacles exist to be overcome. Death. Elena watched as the alien being seemed to process this information. Its white eyes shifted between Rosa and Elena, and she could feel that uncomfortable scanning sensation intensifying. The fourth-generation anomaly demonstrates preliminary activation, the Void Hunter observed. Harvesting protocols will be implemented immediately. I'm sorry, Elena interrupted, but did you just say harvesting? The alien's attention focused on her with an intensity that made her feel like she was being dissected on a cellular level. The Santos genetic template will be extracted and replicated. The resultant biological weapons will be used to suppress resistance movements throughout the galaxy. Elena felt something snap inside her chest, like a rubber band stretched too far. The emotion that followed wasn't fear or even anger. It was a cold, crystalline fury that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than her conscious mind. "You want to use my DNA to create weapons of terror," she said, her voice remarkably calm. "You want to turn my family's gift into a tool for galactic oppression." "Correct. That's not going to happen." Elena stepped forward, and she felt rather than saw everyone in the command center take an involuntary step backward. The air around her seemed to shimmer with heat distortion, and when she looked at the Void Hunter on the screen, she saw something she had never expected to see in those alien features: uncertainty. "The dampening fields are functioning normally," the Void Hunter said. But its voice carried a note that might have been confusion. "Neural suppression is at maximum efficiency. Your dampening fields are designed to counteract conscious emotional manipulation," Rosa said, moving to stand beside her granddaughter. "What Elena is doing isn't conscious." The temperature in the command center seemed to drop by 20 degrees. Elena could feel something building inside her, like pressure behind a dam that was starting to crack. The sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating. "The biological response is impossible," the Void Hunter insisted. "Our suppression technology is based on complete neural analysis of the Santos bloodline." "You analyzed my bloodline," Rosa said. "But Elena's generation is different. Stronger. More focused." Elena looked at her grandmother. "What do you mean, more focused?" "Our family's ability has been evolving, sweetheart. Each generation is more powerful than the last, but also more controlled. I could generate terror in any species, but it affected everyone equally. You can target it." As if to demonstrate, Elena focused her attention on the Void Hunter ship, visible through the viewport. She didn't know exactly what she was doing, but instinct seemed to guide her actions. She reached out with something that wasn't quite sight and wasn't quite touch. Finding the alien minds aboard that vessel, what she found there surprised her. The Void Hunters weren't emotionless machines as she had expected. They were creatures capable of sophisticated thoughts and feelings, including very sophisticated fears. They were afraid of extinction, afraid of failure, afraid of the vast emptiness between stars. But more than anything else, they were afraid of becoming unnecessary. Elena smiled, and every Draconian in the command center shuddered in response to the expression on her face. "You're afraid," she said to the Void Hunter on the screen, "that your creators made you too well. You're afraid that you've become so efficient at survival that you've forgotten what you were supposed to be surviving for." The alien's white eyes widened. "Psychological analysis is not possible through standard communication channels." "I'm not using standard communication channels." Elena reached out with her ability, not trying to generate fear but simply amplifying what was already there. The Void Hunter's own doubts and anxieties magnified 1,000-fold and reflected back at it. The result was immediate and dramatic. The alien being let out a sound that was part scream and part electronic feedback, stumbling backward as if it had been physically struck. Through the viewport, Elena could see other Void Hunters aboard the ship, reacting similarly. "Impossible," the creature gasped. "The dampening fields are designed to protect you from external manipulation," Elena said. "But I'm not manipulating anything. I'm just showing you what you already know." She expanded her focus, reaching out to the other ships in the Void Hunter fleet. Each vessel contained dozens of alien minds, all struggling with the same fundamental questions. What was their purpose? What would happen when their mission was complete? What would become of them in a galaxy they had conquered and sterilized? Elena didn't try to answer these questions. She simply made sure every Void Hunter in the fleet was asking them at the same time. The effect was cascading and catastrophic. Ship after ship began reporting system failures as their crews became paralyzed by existential terror. Some vessels simply stopped moving, their crews unable to function. Others began firing on each other, their minds unable to distinguish between internal and external threats. "That's enough," Rosa said quietly, placing a hand on Elena's shoulder. Elena blinked, suddenly aware that she had been holding her breath. The connection to the Void Hunter mines faded, leaving her feeling drained but oddly satisfied. On the main screen, the surviving Void Hunter was staring at her with something that might have been awe. "You did not generate fear," it said slowly. "You revealed truth." "Sometimes," Elena said. "They're the same thing." The alien nodded slowly. The fourth-generation Santos anomaly represents a significant evolutionary advancement. Harvesting is no longer tactically advisable. Good choice. The convergence of the void will withdraw from this region of space. Interaction with the Santos bloodline will be avoided in all future operations. An even better choice. The communication channel closed, and Elena watched as the Void Hunter ships began departing the system. Some of them were moving erratically, their crews clearly still struggling with the revelations she had forced them to confront. Others moved with purpose, but away from inhabited space rather than toward it. "Will they be back?" Elena asked. Rosa considered the question carefully. "Not for a very long time. Maybe never. You didn't just defeat them. You showed them that their entire mission might be based on flawed assumptions. That's the kind of revelation that changes a species." Elena sank into the nearest chair, suddenly exhausted. "Is it always like that? Using the ability, I mean? It gets easier with practice," Rosa said. "And you'll learn to control the intensity. What you did today was the equivalent of using a nuclear weapon to open a door. Effective, but not subtle." Elena laughed, surprising herself. "I think I can live with lacking subtlety." 2. Ready. Around them, the Draconians were beginning to relax, though they still maintained their careful distance. Admiral Kairoth approached them with obvious reluctance. "Agent Santos," he said formally. "On behalf of the Draconian Empire, I want to thank you for your service." "Both of you," Rosa nodded acknowledgement. "The emergency provisions of the treaty are now rescinded. The Santos bloodline returns to civilian status." "And Elena?" Kairoth asked. "What are her intentions?" Elena looked around the command center, at the assembled dragons and aliens and humans who had all been prepared to face extinction together. She thought about her quiet life as a freight hauler, about the cargo ship waiting for her in docking bay 12, about the passengers who were depending on her to transport them safely to their destinations. "I'm going back to work," she said. "I have atmospheric processors to buy and cargo to deliver." Kairoth looked puzzled. "You could command fleets. You could have any position in any government in known space." Elena stood up, brushing dust off her coveralls. "Maybe. But my grandmother was right about the importance of quiet lives. The galaxy doesn't need another weapon. It just needs people willing to protect what matters." She turned to Rosa. "Are you coming with me? I could use a co-pilot." Rosa smiled, and this time it was purely the expression of a grandmother proud of her granddaughter. "I thought you'd never ask." As they walked toward the docking bay together, Elena could feel the stares of everyone they passed. Word of what had happened would spread throughout the galaxy within days. The Santos bloodline had returned to active status, if only briefly, and had reminded the universe why some family names became legends. But Elena found that she didn't mind the attention as much as she had expected. She had spent her entire adult life trying to be invisible, trying to live quietly in the vast spaces between worlds. Now she understood that sometimes the most important thing you could do was make sure everyone knew exactly where you stood. The galaxy was full of predators and tyrants and beings who thought that fear was a tool to be wielded against the innocent. It was good for them to know that there were humans who could remind them what true terror felt like. Elena Martinez walked back to her cargo ship with her supposedly dead grandmother at her side, ready to return to her quiet life of hauling freight between the stars. But now that quiet life came with the knowledge that she carried the ability to end wars with a look and topple empires with a whisper. It was, she thought, probably the best job security in the galaxy. Behind them, the Draconians watched them go with expressions of relief and residual terror. Admiral Kairoth made a note in his official log that the Santos bloodline had once again proven that humanity's greatest strength was not its technology or its numbers, but its ability to produce individuals who could make the impossible seem inevitable. The war was over before it had truly begun, ended not by superior firepower but by a young woman who had learned to weaponize truth itself. And somewhere in the vast emptiness between stars, the Void Hunters fled toward the rim of the galaxy, carrying with them questions that would haunt them for centuries to come.